Hello and welcome, my name is Racho, and today we will be talking about Qorvex. Now, Qorvex has made quite a stir in the community. Everyone is talking about him. This is because his new augment took him from being a pretty frame to being a... Okay, let's be real, the augment is just a band-aid fix. Literally the only thing it does is allow him to move around in his fourth ability. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I have a bit of a poor opinion about Qorvex. I will admit though, while I was making this video and doing my testing of him and played him a bit more than I previously have, my opinion has improved of him. But I do find it funny that there's been such amazing talk about Qorvex since his new augment came out, and the augment doesn't actually do anything except let you move in the fourth ability. I'd recommend using it because the fourth ability is terrible, that it stops you from being able to move, which never should have happened, which is one of my gripes with Qorvex, because it's a bad mistake to make a Warframe with an ability that stops your movement in a game that's major selling point is about the amazing movement system. But okay, that's fine, whatever. Call me crazy, but I'm a strong believer that augments should be used to make a Warframe's ability more powerful. They should not be used to make a Warframe's ability more user-friendly, because that should just be a part of the base kit. And if you don't believe me that the augment doesn't actually do anything to add it to what the ability does, this is without the augment. And this is with the augment. It does the same thing. Literally, only difference, I can move now. That's literally the only difference. But hey, whatever. Still, honestly, I did actually have some fun making this video, making this build. And I do have a build, obviously, to showcase in this video. I'm not just here to talk bad things about Qorvex the entire time. But I'll start by going over his kit, and at the same time, I'll obviously talk about some of my issues with his kit. Qorvex is passive. Literally just gives him 3 meters to punch through to weapons. That's it. There's nothing else to it. It's pretty dumb. The reason why I say it's dumb is because this is a weapon buff passive, and Qorvex's entire kit is based around ability DPS, so it doesn't make any sense that his passive would be a weapon buff. It doesn't make any sense. His first ability is called Pillars. It's called Pillars. It creates these pretty cool looking radiation pillars, and you can have up to 2 activated at once. Each of them will have a ring around them, and they will pulse every 1.5 seconds. What they do when they pulse is slow down enemies by 35%, which doesn't scale off anything, it's always 35%, and also apply some radiation damage with guaranteed radiation status effect. So it slows enemies and also crowd controls them. That's pretty useful. The one complaint I have about this ability is this weapon right here, this one right here. Do you see this weapon? It's called Epitaph. It force procs cold, and it has the radiation mode, so it does what this ability does, except faster, because I can fire it quicker than they pulse. Yeah, could be crazy, but I don't think an ability should be so easily replaced by a weapon. And also, you don't need to use Epitaph. You can use literally any primer, any companion, put radiation and cold on them. No longer need Qorvex's first ability. That said, this ability does come in handy specifically with Qorvex's kit, so I'm not going to be too mean on it, and previously I would have been meaner on it than I am now, but after realizing the usefulness of it with specifically Qorvex, I'm realizing this ability does make more sense in this kit. It is his Helminth ability though, which makes no sense because there's no reason to ever use this as a Helminth because Epitaph, any other primer modded with radiation and cold. Yeah. Qorvex's second ability is called Contamination Wall. Contaminant Wall. It is a grouping ability, and you could argue it's a pretty bad grouping ability, but it actually makes a lot of sense for Qorvex's kit, so I actually quite like this ability. It creates 2 walls in front of him, and any enemy caught in the area will be grouped together in a straight line, as you can see. The reason why I say you could argue this is a bad grouping ability is because they get grouped in a straight line. Grouping abilities want them to be grouped in like actually a ball, not in a straight line like this. But for Qorvex, this makes a lot of sense because of his passive. So I can just shoot down the line. As you can see, I just shot them all. And it also makes sense for his fourth ability, which we'll talk about in a bit. So this does actually make a lot of sense for Qorvex's kit, and I actually quite like it in that way. Also, it does have a really good augment. Its augment will armor strip enemies and also reduce their shields by 50%, scaling up power strength, of course. And also, any pillar that gets hit by the ability will have their armor reset. By pillar, I mean his first ability. Additionally, if you do use the ability to hit any of your pillars, they will be empowered and they will pulse every 0.75 seconds, which is which is double the speed of what they normally are, making them a lot more better. Qorvex's third ability is called Dissementric Guard. Qorvex does his best Revenant impersonation, and he summons these pillars around him with a set amount of stack scaling of strength. These pillars, he does grant this buff to all allies within affinity range. However, the reason why this is a bad ability is because it only gives him status immunity. It doesn't give you damage immunity like Mesmerskin does. The issue I have with this is the only reason why you actually want this is for knockback immunity, because Qorvex has the highest armor value in the game by a lot, and he has one of the highest health values in the game as well, meaning he is very naturally tanky, so he doesn't really care about any negative status effects excluding knockback, because tanky frames in general just don't care about status effects excluding knockback. Meaning, this entire ability's purpose is to just give you knockback immunity. You know what else gives you knockback immunity? Prime Sure-Footed. Now, in the first ability I said I shouldn't be able to say this ability can be replaced by a weapon. I definitely shouldn't be able to say an ability can be replaced by a single mod. But whatever. Qorvex's fourth ability, the reason why we're all here, is called Crucible Blast. Qorvex will fire out a beam from his chest, and it will do radiation damage to enemies and affect them with the radiation status effect. In addition to this, enemies that get hit by the radiation status effect will have an explosion centered on them for an 8-meter radius. And the damage the explosion does scales off the amount of damage, the amount of radiation status effects they already had. Then and this explosion does go through walls. Any enemy that hits by that explosion, which is also already affected by at least one radiation status effect, will also have an explosion caused on themselves, which will affect all enemies in the radius except the one that originally caused the first explosion. In addition to this, the second explosion will take the amount of status effects on the original enemy and add that into its damage calculation. So if the original enemy had 10 and the new enemy had 10, instead of it being, I think it's 250 is the base damage it does, times 10, it would be 250 times 20. So each time these explosions trigger off one another, they do more and more and more damage. Meaning this ability basically sets off a chain reaction, dealing more and more damage to enemies, and it's really fun to watch, if I'm being honest. If I just go ahead and prime these enemies with radiation, and I simply just do that, and you'll see the explosion go trigger, and they'll eventually kill them all. What makes this ability powerful and what actually is doing the damage with this ability is the explosions that get triggered off the abilities. The actual beam itself doesn't really do much damage, and you can see by holding down the beam, I'm not killing them any faster than what they would have just been killed if I just turned off the beam like I had been doing so far, just to let the explosions kill them. And since the chain reactions are set up in a way to just continuously chain off each other, so once one explosion happens, the explosions will just keep going and going and going and going and going as long as there's enemies near other enemies. You kind of only need to shoot the beam at enemies in a general direction for a few seconds, and then you can just shoot it somewhere else. This is where his first ability actually comes in useful, because his first ability can have a relatively big radius, so you can just pop and forget it, and the first ability will go and apply radiation status effects to every enemy in the area. So all you have to do then is fire the Crucible Blast at a single enemy, and it will set off a chain reaction, popping a lot of enemies with the explosions, and it's really fun to watch. This is definitely a lot more useful than using companions or a primer on yourself to actually prime enemies with radiation, because it'll just hit enemies in a larger radius and more passively. So the first ability does actually have some use for this. Now, Crucible Blast does have innate punch through enemies, and the Qorvex's passive also gives it punch through walls, but personally, I don't really see that as his passive making sense with his kit, because let's be real here, the ability just has 3 meters to punch through. The passive just also happens to exist at the same time. Like it's not really doing anything, you know? Okay, so let's talk about the build I have for you today. So the build is very simple. It is simply just, you find a room, you put your 2 pillars in that room, and make sure the room is one with a lot of like open space. So this setup doesn't really work on all tile sets. This is because your first ability doesn't go through walls and it has a hard line of sight check, which is a bit upsetting. So you want to be make sure what room you're playing in, and you want to set up these pillars in your room, and that's kind of going to be your kill zone. Then you're just going to activate your fourth ability as necessary to essentially kill those enemies. I did end up keeping the third ability just so I didn't have to mod on Prime Sure-Footed, but you could Helminth off the third ability and keep the second ability if you wanted to, but this setup doesn't need the second ability either at all, which is why I felt fine getting rid of the second ability. For the Helminth ability, I am using Raw. This is because Raw is a multiplicative buff to ability damage, and by multiplicative I mean it's multiplicative with power strength, which is a really big buff. However, you do want to mod for a lot of range on Qorvex, so I am actually running negative strength on my other abilities. My fourth ability has positive strength because of precision intensifier, but my other ones are running negative strength, at least at the start. And Arcane Augmented will end up giving us positive strength, but at the start we are running negative strength. But because of this, I am also using the focus skill Matarai, so just whenever you, before you have to cast Raw, just go into your operator, avoid Spleen 2 times, and then cast Raw, which will let you have that 40% power strength from Matarai affect Raw to give you that bigger buff, which is really, really convenient. And then obviously with the Archon Shards, we will be using 5 Topaz Archon Shards. I only have 4 on the setup right now, but ignore that. 5 Topaz Archon Shards will give you an additional 50% extra damage to your abilities that are against enemies that are already afflicted with a radiation status effect. And obviously Qorvex will be doing that a lot because that's his whole setup. Talforged ones will give you 15%. So in total you would either get 50 or you get 75% with Talforged ones. This is also a really awesome damage buff for Qorvex and why he doesn't actually need a lot of strength, because this buff is multiplicative with both raw and power strength. So we actually end up getting strength, raw, and power strength, 3 multiplicative buffs, all strengthening the damage of our weapons, which is a really, really awesome buff to our ability setup. Now let's obviously talk about Qorvex's build. Let's talk about the Qorvex build. Physique is the aura mod, not because of anything specific, it just works in the default aura polarity, and I didn't put on any format in his aura polarity. Feel free to put on any aura mod you want. I am running Arcane Battery because, like I said, he has a lot of armor. He has 875 armor by default. This is the highest armor value of any Warframe in the game by a good bit. I'm pretty sure Valkyrie Prime is second, and she only has like 700 something armor. So he has a lot of armor, like a ridiculous amount of armor. This means Arcane Battery by default can give us a good amount of energy and makes it so I don't have to mod on Primed Flow on Qorvex itself. We are running Mods Augmented. Since we are running Overextended, we are lowering our ability strength by 60%. Once we built up Mods Augmented, we will get 60% ability strength, which will equal out Overextended. Then we do also have Augur Secrets, because I didn't want to run the negative effects of Primed Blind Rage, or Transient Fortitude. So Augur Secrets will give us, with Mods Augmented maxed out, 124 ability strength for all of our other abilities. Plus, we also have the 40% from Matarai, so Raw will actually be getting 164% ability strength once Mods Augmented is maxed out. And then obviously we do have Precision Intensify for the 90% ability strength for Crucible Blast. So even at the start of the mission, before Mods Augmented is started, we actually end up with 154% because we have 130 from Precision Intensify and we get the extra 24 from Augur Secrets. And then once Mods Augmented is maxed out, we walk away with 214% ability strength for Crucible Blast, which is pretty good. We do have Stretch and Augur Reach for extra ability range. You want as much range as possible for Qorvex, because range increases the explosion range of that is centered on each enemies for Crucible Blast, and the bigger that is, the more chance you'll actually be hitting enemies with it, which will obviously trigger more follow-up chain reaction explosions, and it will also increase the range of his first ability as well, which is really useful because we want that to passively prime enemies with the radiation status effect for us. Prime Continuity is here solely for his second ability, for Raw. It does increase the range of his first ability as well, but the first ability has a pretty good range to begin with, and also whenever you target the ability with your fourth ability with the augment, it does freeze the duration of it while the ability is activated. Also, I did forget to mention that hitting one of these pillars with your fourth ability will empower them the same way the second ability does, so they'll pulse faster and apply more radiation status effects. Equilibrium is for energy economy, as this is a channeled ability now, and the amount of energy it does the amount of energy it drains over time increases the longer the ability is activated. So it drains 20 energy per second, and then it will increase how much energy it drains per second by 0.5 every second. So Equilibrium is definitely needed to increase the energy income for the setup. A lot of people have been using, with similar builds, Arcane Universal Fallout, which is a new arcane that comes from Temporal Archimedia, which makes it enemies with afflicted by radiation status effects will have 6% chance per radiation status effect, so up to 60% chance to drop a universal energy orb on death. This is a really cool arcane and will give you all the energy you need in your life, but I don't have any copies of it yet because I haven't actually really messed around with a lot of the new content. I haven't been playing a lot of Temporal Archimedia. I've just really been making and trying out different builds. So I wouldn't, so if you wanted to use, you could definitely use that arcane instead of having to use Equilibrium. However, Equilibrium also works perfectly fine, so you don't need to have that arcane if you didn't want to, and like I don't have it either. So for the companion, I am using Death Cube. This is because my Death Cube is set up for energy orb generation like madness. We have Energy Generator, which is Death Cube's unique precept, which will have it drop an energy orb every 10 kill assists, which is pretty helpful. We also have Duplex Bond. Duplex Bond will summon up to 3 clones every time you use 100 energy, and these clones will go around killing enemies, and every time they kill an enemy, they have a 50% chance of dropping energy orbs. Awesome, even more energy orbs. And then we have Synth Deconstruct. Enemies tagged by Death Cube will have a 25% chance of dropping health orbs on death. So we also get more health orbs from Death Cube as well. So we get more energy orbs and more health orbs, and Equilibrium means we're going to get energy from both of those. Contagious Bond will spread the status effects afflicted by our companion to other enemies when they're killed, which is very good, very powerful for DPS setups in this way. Guardian will give us some additional survivability, making it so that whenever we die, whenever we have our shields being reduced, they get fully restored. Whenever you're in your 4th ability as Qorvex, you're actually immune to damage, so that's just why I didn't mod for any survivability on the setup. You probably want to consider something like a shield getting set up just in case if you're doing this in an endurance, but for base steel path, literally you can just go into your 4th ability and you're immune to damage, and you can just, with the amount of radiation status effects that you'll be applying to enemy, even when you're not in your 4th ability, you won't be getting shot that much, and with this natural tankiness he has from the amount of health and amount of armor he has, you really don't need a mod for any survivability with this setup, for base steel path at the very least. But Guardian is still helpful with that extra bit of survivability, so you may as well have it. Assault mode, so Death Cube can actually attack enemies. Regen to reduce the respawn timer for Death Cube. Enhance vitality and catheter redirection upper survivability, and vacuum as a must-have mod. We have, this is for the companion weapon, we are using Verglass Prime. This is because Verglass is the best companion DPS weapon in the game, and Verglass Prime is obviously better and also easier to get. Serration for the base damage, we have our faction mod, as it is a damage over time setup. It's a viral heat damage over time setup, so you 100% want faction mods to increase the damage as they double dip with damage over time. Speed trigger for the fire range, we have our room rounds and Malagen Force for viral. Make sure they're unranked to fix out status rating, so it applies heat more than viral. Then we have thermite rounds and hellfire for heat. Verglass has inherent cold, so you do need a lot of heat to kind of balance it out, and fast hands for reload speed. For the utility weapons, I would recommend any rifle you like, and simply just put on Amalgam Serration, as it will give you the extra sprint speed. Then you can have Amalgam Barrel Diffusion on your secondary for the extra rolling speed, and I also recommend using Orca Seeker and Orca Pact, because it's just some additional survivability, and you may as well. And then I am using the Protos for my melee, because this evolution right here gives me sprint speed and slide, and this evolution gives me parkour velocity. As I already said earlier in the video, I am using Mataro for my focus skill. This is because of Sling Strength right here. After slinging twice, I get 40% ability strength for 20 seconds, which I'm using to empower the strength of Raw. Anyway, that is all for this video. I do hope you enjoyed it and learned something about Qorvex. I know I kind of ragged on him a little bit. I don't think Qorvex is necessarily a bad Warframe or anything. I also don't necessarily think he's a good Warframe. I think he's pretty mediocre. I think he has some design issues in his kit, but I definitely think he can be very powerful and can be a lot of fun to play. And more than anything, even if he was a bad Warframe and you enjoyed playing him, that really shouldn't matter. You should play whatever you like in this game. It doesn't matter if something's good or something's bad. The game is so easy. You can really get away with playing whatever you want. And it's a game. A game's meant to be enjoyed. You should enjoy it in whatever way you want to enjoy it. Anyway, do check out some of my other content if you like this video. Give me a like, give me a subscribe. Leave me a comment on anything you want. Tell me what your opinion is of Qorvex, if you have any opinion. If you disagree with my critiques of him, feel free to have an open discussion about that as well. And leave a comment about anything else you want. If you have any video recommendations for me, I'm happy to take those as well. And until next time, bye bye.